Pop, persuadable. What is going on, boo-boos? We are going to talk about the Violinist nerf. And this shit just makes no sense to me. Alright, maybe I'm dumb. Like, that's a thing. Maybe I'm dumb. But I don't think that he needs a nerf. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you guys can help me out with that. But let's talk about what this nerf is going to entail. Whether you call it a nerf or an adjustment, it's really up to you. And I have it on my phone because I don't remember it. And pretty much what's going to happen is when you use your magic sound on the survivors, and you know that ability that slows them down essentially, well, now it's going to automatically remove itself slowly after 40 seconds. All right. So normally having that movement debuff and all of that stuff is a good thing for the violinist, okay? So the magic sound will now slowly increase the dismissal progress. When not meditating, the magic sound state will be completely dismissed after 40 seconds. The disarm speed during meditation remains unchanged. The adjustment thinking. The experience of permanent debuff is relatively poor for survivors. At the same time, the conditions that need to be removed from teammates are relatively harsh. Some players will always carry magic sounds to fight without knowing the mechanism, and the actual impact on the battle situation exceeds expectations. So the magic sound debuff is slowly eliminated over time. So this is really catered to lower tiers. According to the translation that's kind of occurring right there, is that people will have the debuff. They don't know that they can meditate it out. And that debuff being there permanently is not fair. And I mean, I've never really heard of a hunter being nerfed because survivors have a difficulty time understanding the mechanism. You know, so for instance, instead of encouraging survivors to learn the game and to learn all of the complex capacity to all of these characters, we're pretty much just essentially dumbing that down, and we're saying, hey, well, we'll just nerf this entirely because we don't have faith that the player base can learn it. So it's almost insulting, actually. And so to highlight this again, in order to remove that debuff when you meditate, that is still the same. It's just that it goes away after 40 seconds. And remember, it's difficult to meditate if you have other players around you or the hunter around you. You can't meditate that debuff away. That slows your character down. So for instance, these musical notes, if it hits somebody, they'll have a debuff and it's going to negatively impact them. And to meditate takes some time. My problem with this nerf is that Violinist at best is an A-tier hunter. So are the devs suggesting that this game is so hunter-sided that we need to start nerfing A-tier hunters? And that's one of my concerns with this nerf. You're pretty much suggesting that this game is so hunter-sided that we have to start going after A-tier hunters, right? Sculptor's getting nerfed, Bonbon's getting nerfed, right? And so the question is, when is Dream Witch nerf coming, right? If you're going to nerf Bonbon, if you're going to nerf Sculptor, you're going to start nerfing A-tier hunters, right? Then Dream Witch, I presume, is eventually coming. And if not, then why? You know, this debuff was the only thing that really made Violinist more of an A-tier hunter, other than being able to stuff a character early game. The idea is that if I hit you with musical notes, you need to meditate it away. Now, here's the thing. I kind of just burped right there. Here's the thing. When it comes to Violinist as a hunter, although it still makes sense to meditate those notes away, because it doesn't make sense to just sit there for 40 seconds with a debuff, the point is that late game, that was a good strategy for Violinist. Sometimes you could provide pressure on the last cipher, hit a whole bunch of people with musical notes, and it really required them to disperse, to meditate that out. And, you know, there are times where people are trying to take that last cipher down and it's at 95% and they try to push it. And my point is that there's circumstances now where this is going to significantly weaken some of what Violinists can do. And that's something that I really don't agree with. I think that this nerf is completely unnecessary. And again, instead of encouraging the player base based on the rationale that's provided, that people wouldn't get rid of the debuff because they didn't understand it, instead of encouraging players to figure out that mechanism, you're pretty much enabling them not to and rewarding them for such, which means that really at the end of the day of having players, it doesn't really solve the issue. It doesn't solve, if the issue is that people aren't getting rid of the buff and it's permanent, yeah, making it 40 seconds will relieve the permanent issue, but it doesn't relieve the issue that players aren't meditating the debuff away in low tiers. There's other things that you can do. If you want to encourage the user base to meditate the debuff away, you can change the logo. You can make the logo blink like a Hell Ember's puppets when they see a survivor near them. That's why it's there, to provide a visual ping so the hunter knows, hey, I can go back to my other puppet over there because somebody's nearby. So by trying to help, apparently, the lower tiers not understanding to meditate, which is fine, I get it. We should always be sympathetic. We should always find ways to encourage and motivate and improve the game sense of all players, and we should always care about more tiers. My argument is not to not care about the lower tiers. My argument is that it doesn't really solve the issue. Because still, if people don't know how to properly meditate it away, then they're still going to be debuffed for 40 seconds. So this solution, the solution to make it automatically disappear after 40 seconds, is a solution that only half helps out the lower tiers and significantly reduces what the hunter can do. Maybe not significantly, but it's still a nerf that is now a consequence to the players who actually learned how to play Violinist good as a map pressure character. You're punishing high tier hunters for using complex strategies to slow the game down, to help them out later on, to benefit lower tier players. That doesn't really resolve, again, the overall issue of not knowing how to meditate. I think that I think that there's a way to resolve this without punishing other players who have spent ample amount of time learning how to play a hunter. Again, that's not even S tier. It's one thing if Violinist was this overpowered character, and he's really not. Yeah, that's why we see him A tier in tournaments. We don't see him really being used as our first option to win. Is he stronger than a lot of hunters? For sure. But again, it comes back to that argument. Are we suggesting that the game is so hunter-sided that we now have to start going after A-tier hunters? And nowhere in the rationale that I'm seeing does it say anything about Violinist being a problem with disproportionate win numbers. And I'm only using win ratios as a measurement because that is the win measurement that they have used primarily in the past. I am using nothing here that NetEase has not used themselves. So again, the idea that you have to nerf a character because characters don't know how to hit a button and meditate it away is a little insane. And I feel like doing this as a means of saying it's the only solution to a problem is not really a good argument. There's other visual indicators that you could have encouraged lower tiers to make sure they accurately hit the button. I don't believe that this is the only solution, right? Like there's times where I see adjustments or nerfs or buffs and I look at it and I'm like, I fucking kind of feel bad for the devs. What are they going to do? It's kind of a difficult situation, right? We've had this conversation with Feaster and the ability to use tentacles properly and hit boxes correctly. It's tough. There's tough times when we have to look and be like, I'd hate to be in the dev's shoes. This is one of those times where I'm like, what the fuck are they thinking? That's kind of where I'm at with this. Again, the rationale that's provided. The experience of permanent debuff is relatively poor for survivors. Well, it should be relatively poor for survivors. Why do I feel bad about that? All right, so we're going to go to another match with a Violinist, of course. And so let's continue talking about this nerf. Again, I don't understand it. I don't really agree with it. I don't think it benefits really anyone. Now, I know that somebody's going to ask, well, in what circumstances is this actually going to affect high tier hunters? I think that's a very fair question. Because most of the survivors are going to remove the debuff anyways, right? If I hit you across the map most of the time, it's going to be better to take time to take down that debuff. Sorry about that. I just sneezed on live feed. I have no idea how I'm going to edit that out. I'm unfamiliar doing this whole face cam thing. By the way, real quick, you can submit your footage if you look at the YouTube description. That tells you how to do it, all right, boo-boos? A lot of people are asking me how to do it. Now, again, maybe I'm nitpicking here, right? Because just like we talked, a lot of times if you hit somebody with a note, they're still going to take it out. But I don't like the idea that at the end of the day, it still is a nerf to him, and it's unnecessary. Even if it's very minor, the point is why are we still adding that minor inconvenience? The idea that we're only allowed to ridicule nerfs that are significant is not a good argument in my opinion, right? The idea that even if you don't think that this is that big of a deal, so it's not that big of a deal to make comments about it or to ridicule it or to criticize it, I just don't agree with that argument, because even minor nerfs and those minor inconveniences are still at a point, still at a level where if they're unjustified, they're unjustified. Minor inconveniences can be just as unjustifiable as major inconveniences, and the idea that we can only criticize major inconveniences is not one I agree with. I like to look at each and individual adjustment, change, nerf, buff, and measure it for what it is. Now, in this case, we're not really measuring anything. It's just subjective opinions regarding whether we think it's ample or not, because there is no objective data other than saying that low tiers are not meditating away the debuffs. Now, in the case of a situation like this, and shout out to Neopsych, I love you. You've been a long-time supporter. I appreciate you. You know, the debuff wouldn't really help them. But what's even more interesting is that now, when you're slowed down like that, to a degree, you have the possibility of kiting until that debuff goes away. And that's also another problem. If you kite for 40 seconds, yeah, it's hard, you're slowed down, but there's priestess portals, what you're seeing right now. There's seer owls. It's not atypical to have a really good survivor, especially with a good team comp, last longer than 40 seconds. And you're pretty much saying that survivors can now out-kite that buff or out-kite the movement speed. Now, I don't know if being near the hunter will get rid of that ability, right? So as an example, in order to meditate, you have to be away from the hunter and survivor. All right, so if I want to meditate that debuff, I need to be away from the hunter and survivor. I don't know if that is still true, so it's going to be, I could be wrong. All right, so as an example, you can't meditate when you're near the hunter, so maybe if you're kiting near the hunter, the debuff doesn't go away. Maybe you still have to be away from other survivors. I don't know the answer to that. It says when not meditating, the magic sound state will be completely dismissed after 40 seconds. So I'd like to know, and I don't know as of now, and I would like one of the people in the comments to tell me, when this gets removed in 40 seconds, does it still get removed when you're near other players and the hunter? Or do you have to be away from everybody for 40 seconds, just like you would to meditate? Or do the circumstances not matter, and it's an automatic 40 seconds debuff removed? I'd like to know that. Does the 40 seconds restart every time you get hit by an additional note? I'd like to know that as well. I don't know the answers. This is just a discussion. Once it finally comes out and I know all the answers, we can do like a review of the consequences to this. But what I really want you to get away from this video is that there is an adjustment coming. There was rationale provided as to why that's going to occur. Do we think it's good enough? And what do we think the long-term implications of a character? And finally, are we at the point where we really need to start nerfing A-tier hunters? I stuttered there. Are we really at that point? Right? Because when we nerf a character, when we nerf a hunter, we really got to look at it and say, is this really game breaking? Is this really a huge problem? You know, we have to take nerfs pretty seriously. We can't just start handing that out as candy. Where's the objective data? Where's the numbers? Where are we seeing this exploited? Anyways, thank you very much for watching my video and my rambles of an old man, as my leg calls me, George Washington. I appreciate all of you. I will be reading the comments, and I know some of you have been on that test server. I just haven't had the opportunity because COVID has been kicking my ass in the workforce over here. Lots of patients to work with. So if anyone has any other information to contribute to this, by all means, go to the YouTube comments, provide that commentary. I usually heart things when I read them. I need to do a better job at that because I usually read a lot of comments. And I'd like to see what your input, your opinions are. Am I overreacting? Do you think it's a big deal? What's your opinion? I read them all. Even if you disagree, just don't be a dick about it. And I usually appreciate everyone's feedback. So thanks once again for watching my video. Everybody have a beautiful day. Bye now.